So in my presentation, I would like to focus on the use of hate speech in the internet in post-accord Bosnia and Herzegovina. When I started to do this research, my major interest was to see if there is a connection between wars that happened at the end of the last century and the usage of ethnic hate speech in internet now, and if there is this connection, what it can tell us about trauma and reconciliation. So I will start briefly with mentioning the role of the media in escalation of Yugoslav wars, and then I will move to the contemporary situation in Bosnia. Afterwards, I will apply the theory of reconciliation time framework developed by peace builder John Paul Lederach, and I will also provide some recommendation of how I think it may be addressed, this problem of hate speech in the internet. I would not surprise anybody if I say that nature of armed conflict has significantly changed with the development of technologies. Political leaders and warlords often utilize media tools such as television, radio, print media to disseminate hate speech and mobilize people against each other. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum defines hate speech as, and I'm citing here, inflammatory language, often insulting and derisive, that targets an individual or group, and they may or may not include a call to violence. The wars that took place in Bosnia at the end of last century could serve as an example of how media could be used for this kind of purpose. In his book Primetime Crime, Kemal Spahić describes how during the Yugoslav wars, media companies used to distort historical and contemporary events to pit people against each other. He was mentioning telestudio Pale TV that operated in Bosnia and that popularized the policy of ethnic cleansing directed against Bosnian Muslims. And additionally, during that time, highly emotional and very sensitive images about all the crimes committed by military groups, by Ustaše and Chetniks during the Second World War, those memories was also brought to the surface by the media, which also deteriorated the situation. And as we know, the Dayton Agreement terminated the armed phase of conflict. After the destructive effect of the wartime ethnic propaganda was recognized both on national and international level, legal measures were undertaken in Bosnia to make sure that this kind of events will not happen in the future. And I read about the discrimination and inciting for discrimination were prohibited by the law. Criminal Code of Bosnia and Herzegovina established sentences for up to 10 years for calling or incited to genocide or other crimes against humanity. So television, radio, and print media were abiding with certain standards of how to deliver information to people without resorting to inflammatory language, as it happened before. However, if we look how time changes, we can also see that patterns of information circulation and communication also have changed since 1995. In many countries, including Bosnia, internet has begun to overshadow other media sources, especially if we talk about younger population, about young people. According to some reports, 62% of Bosnians now have access to internet, so it's a big percentage. While internet is becoming more and more prevalent means of information and opinion exchange, it also remains one of the least controllable spheres of the media. The recent reports of the organization Balkan Discourse indicate the growth of hate speech usage in Bosnian web forums and social media discussion. Such incidents often include offensive comments that are directed against someone else's ethnicity. A media expert, Borislav Vukojevic, a local media expert, compares the online hate comments that are used now in the internet to ethnic propaganda that was used during the war. He says that even so the hate speech in the internet is less visible compared to that propaganda, it still creates division and polarize people along ethnic lines. And there are several reasons why it's hard to control the content of internet forums. First of all, it's impossible to identify real people behind internet users, behind profiles. Second, there are no legal instruments that could oblige moderators of web forums to monitor and filter comments on their websites. But when I was doing this research, I was interested more not to how to control what people say on the internet, but what this usage can tell us about more broad general situation in post-accord Bosnia. I was wondering if it's accidental that 20 years after the war, young people who were not, many of whom were not even born during the war or before when the war started, post comments that include elements of ethnic hate speech. And then I use the theory of reconciliation time framework to understand it better. According to peace scholar John Paul Lederach, time in the context of protracted conflict should be analyzed on 4 different levels. Those are recent events, lived history, remembered history, and narrative. And I will briefly introduce all of them. Recent events, as he argues, is something that has taken a place in society within the last 2 years. Such events represent daily reality of society. If we look at the Bosnian context, we can see that exploitation of nationalist discourse by some ethnocentric political parties, denial of wartime crimes by some leaders, as well as glorification of military leaders, are elements that constitute daily reality of society for Bosnian youth. Next level of time, lived history, is the sum of all events that one individual experienced during his or her lifetime. Childhood of many young Bosnians who were born during or after the war was marked by educational system called 2 schools under 1 roof, and probably you all know what the system is about. The system was segregated along ethnic lines. Additionally, as some experts argue, the lived history of Bosnian youth is significantly different from lived history of their parents. While experiences horrors of the armed conflict, the older generation of parents, they still remember times of peaceful coexistence when people of different ethnic origins used to live side by side in Yugoslavia, and it was relative peace. But when we look at the younger Bosnians, they don't have this memory in their lifetime, and they were raised during ethnic segregation. Next level, remembered history. It coincides with Vamik-Volkan concept of chosen trauma, or transgenerational chosen trauma, and describes a series of historical, often tragic events that affect and shape groups' identity. A person may not experience some specific tragic event herself, but that memories about this event can be transmitted to this person through parents or grandparents' stories. That's how it happens. It can be argued that for Bosnian population, the atrocities that were committed before by those military groups of Ustaše and Chetniks during Second World War, as well as inter-ethnic hostilities that happened during breakup of Yugoslavia, became elements of a collective chosen trauma or collective remembered history, and it was transmitted to younger people. And finally, narrative. Narrative is, as Lederach is saying, is an all-embracing collective story that exists among members of a specific social group, and this story helps them to explain their past, present, and future. Violent conflicts split narrative, and the only way to restore it is to initiate a collective healing in society. That's why we all, I believe, came here. But the question is, how is it possible to initiate a collective healing and reconciliation among young people whose recent events are characterized by ethnocentric discourses they hear from the media, from their society? Lived history are filled with memories of post-war segregation, and remembered history is burdened with transgenerational traumas. In his journey, the journey towards reconciliation, Lederach argues that to develop a peace-building model, we need to carefully consider specific features of pre-conflict, conflict, and post-conflict time. When past does not offer reliable memories of peaceful coexistence, and when the present is shaky and unsteady, we need to build peace focusing on the future. And based on this model, I would argue that providing young people with a safe space to imagine a peaceful future can inspire them to work towards that future in the present, and may eventually empower them later to deal with the difficult past, with difficult memories. And if we talked about recommendation or like some possible solutions how the problem of hate speech could be addressed, I believe that it's important to understand that this issue of online hate speech should be treated not as a problem in itself that could be fixed with some sort of quick fix, but rather an indicator of a collective trauma, very deep collective trauma, that should be addressed properly. And I believe that it's necessary to train youth how to recognize incidents of hate speech in the internet and other places, and how to report them to proper institutions. But I think that it may be even more important to provide with them as a safe space, where they will be able to examine root causes of those hate comments that people post online, and they will be able to develop some creative tools of how to combat it. And I personally think that prevalence of hate speech and that transgenerational trauma may be addressed, it's only one of the possible solutions, by some sort of consistent problem-solving participatory workshop. I was thinking about that workshop, trying to imagine how it may look like in this context. And I was thinking that it should comprise 4 stages. In the first stage, young participants will be invited to think together about possible reasons that may prompt their peers to post offensive comments in the internet. During the second part, youth may be introduced to the model of nonviolent communication, which was developed by, I believe, American psychologist and peace builder Marshall Rosenberg. This model helps people to examine and express their needs and feelings without using blaming language. In the next section, participants may be encouraged to use the aforementioned model to analyze what real needs people who post hate messages may have and they're not able to express. And also, they could be suggested to write essays about social issues that are dear to their hearts, that are important for them, using principles of conflict-sensitive journalism. I also think that it may be useful to encourage youth to utilize their local knowledge and to see what are some possible ways of how their essays and ideas may be delivered to people they are interested to deliver to, and such resources as newspapers and magazines, personal blogs, social media could be one of the ways how those ideas could be distributed in society. And I believe that I hope that through such participation in such a project, youth will be able to enhance their critical and analytical skills to be able to distinguish cases of manipulation in the media, and also they may become interested in using creative writing to further promote peace in their society. So just some ideas. Yeah.
Thank you.